And for more on Alibaba's earnings and its long-term growth plans, we're joined by Dr. Barton Jr. He's the Chief Technical Strategist of Money Map Press. Dr., good to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, it's great to be with you, Michelle.
Dr., big day for Alibaba. The company did beat on earnings. Let's keep that in mind. It reported 81 cents per share. That did top Wall Street estimates of 75 cents. It did miss on revenue, but revenue was up 40% from the same period last year. So, Dr., were expectations just too high?
Well, I don't think that the expectations necessarily were too high. The reason so many people bought Alibaba, as you've already said, the largest IPO ever, the reason so many people bought it was because of the growth story and the China as a growth market, especially in e-commerce. And so last quarter, when they reported their September earnings, the numbers came in great, up about 53.7% year over year. This year, as you've already said, they're up around 40% year over year. So not as strong growth. In addition, you've already touched on one other thing. Singles Day was such a smashing success. I think people extrapolated that success onto some of their other all quarter revenues, and so when they had the miss, that was about 5% versus analyst expectations. That really knocked them down a notch in that this isn't a juggernaut growth story quarter after quarter that people were hoping for.
Okay, perhaps not, but still 40% up from the same period last year. And there were many positives in the report. If you look at the numbers, 42% of total sales were generated from mobile. That's a big deal. Alibaba's monthly active users on mobile also increased to 265 million from 217 million during the last quarter. So, Dr., what's your take on the bright spots?
Well, I think the bright spots are that their earnings were up again, and while the revenues were down, their margins were up huge. Their margins went from 50.5% gross margins last quarter to 58% this quarter. Already the envy of almost everybody in the world to have those kinds of margins. That means they can do lots of things like invest in new marketing plans, even in capital investments if they'd like to. They have a lot of things that you can do when you're having those kinds of margins. Another big number that people weren't talking about that really exceeded expectations were the number of annual users that they have on their site. They went from 307 million to 334 million year over year, and that was a big increase, or just, excuse me, quarter over quarter. That was a really big increase that eclipsed anything that anyone was expecting.
Dr., certainly a lot of good news in the report. The stock was down 9% today, and many say that that has less to do with the earnings and more to do with the troubles with Chinese regulators. In fact, in the earnings call, Alibaba Executive Vice Chairman Zhou Cai says that the company is deeply troubled by a report from China's State Administration of Industry and Commerce claiming that Alibaba allowed the sale of fake goods on its platforms, Taobao and Tmall. How does Alibaba monitor that, and how do you see this whole thing playing out?
Well, it is a concern, and I think, when you look at the tape and what happened this morning, we knew the news of the Chinese white paper that came out from SAIC, as you've already mentioned, and the stock really reacted nominally to that. But I think when that combined and the synergy combined with the revenue miss, as you've already said, earnings make, but revenue miss, I think that's what really spooked investors and traders. That regulatory side of things, is China going to impose themselves even more into the Alibaba picture, is something that people are looking at. Does that give the company some headwinds that are going to push against them in the near and even intermediate to long term? So resolving that will be very important, I think, in the eyes of investors and traders. But I really do think that it's something that will be resolved rather quickly, because Alibaba is good for China and China good for Alibaba. How do I see that playing out? I think, go ahead, Michelle.
Well, as you mentioned, Alibaba is good for China, China is good for Alibaba, but how can Alibaba really control the sale of all the goods on its user-to-user platform? Is that even something that is viable? And what has been its strategy so far? They have said that they do spot checks. Is that sufficient? Should they be doing more? Does China have a point here?
Well, I think China does have a point here, and it has been a problem with counterfeit goods being sold. So the issue is not one, it's the issue is when someone does a whole bunch and continues to do it. Alibaba is going to have to spend more money. They claim to have spent $16 million last year fighting counterfeits. They're going to have to spend some more of their profits fighting this issue so that they can have the credibility with the government and with the worldwide commerce market that they really are proactive in doing this. Again, it's not that somebody sold one, it's when they're doing a bunch and they have to have ways to take down sites and sellers who are found to be doing this and to be really proactive in that.
All right, DR, we also heard Jack Ma discussing globalization earlier. Moving into the US markets has been a big question mark, and he's not doing it the way it's been expected. Tell us about that.
Yeah, a lot of people thought they might try to come in and compete with Amazon or with eBay in the marketplace. And what they're doing, I think, is a very wise strategy, very prudent for them. And that is they're leveraging their strongest corporate asset, which is their relationship with the Chinese consumer. So their first foray that was just announced about 12 days ago is to use the Alipay division, which you've already talked about, as a central focus to help U.S. retailers do business with folks in China, with consumers in China. That's going to work in a couple of ways. The issues of U.S. retailers selling goods to China, you have the issues of payment, and you also have the logistics of getting the goods over there. So what Alipay is going to be able to do is to be able to be the intermediary and handle the payment side of that. Plus, they're also discussing putting in shipment centers where a retailer will ship something to a U.S. Alipay and then, center, and then they'll make sure that it gets delivered. They'll take the responsibility to get it delivered to the end user, and I think that's all very good.
All right, certainly a lot to keep our eye on. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, DR Barton Jr., Chief Technical Strategist of Money Map Press.